This is where people usually go wrong. They believe that their peace of mind is a hostage to the behavior of others. A fragile glass ornament that shatters every time someone fails to meet an expectation, ignores a text, or makes a choice that defies logic. The agony of the human experience is often not found in the events themselves, but in the exhausting, subterranean struggle to control the uncontrollable. Imagine a woman standing at the edge of a social circle, her phone a glowing totem of anxiety as she refreshes a feed, searching for a confirmation that she was invited, wanted, or seen. This is the archetype of the controller, the person who mistakes hypervigilance for safety. When Mel Robbins introduces the let them theory, she isn't offering a white flag of defeat, she is handing over a master key to an internal fortress. The narrative begins with a visceral realization of how much psychic energy is leaked through the cracks of other people's autonomy. The story follows the psychological awakening of an individual who realizes that by trying to force the world to mirror their desires, they have become the very architect of their own suffering. The first major movement in this psychological journey centers on the uninvited guest. We see a protagonist who discovers, through the cold lens of social media, that their closest friends are gathered at a dinner table where no chair was set for them. The immediate response is an internal explosion, a frantic search for why. The ego demands a reason because, without one, it feels invisible. In this moment, the narrative shifts from the external event to the internal battlefield. The let them theory intervenes like a cold splash of water. If they didn't invite you, let them. If they are having a good time without you, let them. The analysis of this moment reveals a profound Jungian truth. The sting of exclusion is often a projection of our own lack of self-parenting. By letting them, the individual stops being a victim of the group's choice and becomes an observer of the group's reality. This is the first lesson in emotional alchemy, transforming the leaden weight of rejection into the gold of objective data. You learn that their choice is not a commentary on your worth, but a revelation of their alignment. When you stop struggling to be included, you finally have the clarity to see if these are even the people you wish to be with. The narrative then expands into the complex, often painful territory of family dynamics, specifically the archetype of the anxious parent. We witness a mother watching her adult son drift toward a career or a relationship that feels like a slow-motion train wreck. Her hands itch to grab the wheel, her mind is a factory of unsolicited advice and catastrophic what-ifs. This is the struggle against the shadow of responsibility. The story illustrates that when we refuse to let them make their own mistakes, we are actually stealing their growth. We are telling them, subconsciously, that they are incompetent. By applying the theory here, the mother is forced to sit in the discomfort of her own fear. Let him fail. The theory whispers. Let him choose poorly. The lesson learned is that true love is not a cage of protection, but a witness to autonomy. It is the realization that you cannot learn the lessons intended for another soul. By releasing the need to save, the parent discovers a new form of intimacy, one based on respect rather than rescue. This segment analyzes the cost of overfunctioning, showing how it breeds resentment on both sides and prevents the natural evolution of the relationship, transitioning from the domestic to the romantic. The script follows the archetype of the commitment seeker. This is the individual who has spent years trying to remodel a partner into a version that is ready for marriage. Honesty, or vulnerability. They believe that if they just provide enough love, enough patience, or enough reminders, the other person will finally step up. The narrative portrays this as a form of emotional puppetry that leaves the puppeteer exhausted and the puppet resentful. The let them theory acts as a sharp blade, cutting the strings. If they don't want to commit, let them. If they want to be distant, let them. This is where the narrative reaches a peak of psychological intensity. By letting them be exactly who they are without your interference, you finally see the gift of the truth. Most people spend their lives in love with a potential version of someone else. Let them strips away the mask of potential and reveals the raw reality. The analysis here is brutal but liberating. You cannot change a person's want. You can only change your stay. This realization shifts the power from the one who is withholding to the one who is observing. It is the ultimate act of reclaiming the self from the gravitational pull of another's indecision. As the narrative flows deeper, It tackles the professional people pleaser. The employee who stays up at night wondering why a manager's tone was clipped or why a colleague didn't acknowledge their contribution. The story describes the workplace as a theater of misinterpreted cues where the ego goes to die 1,000 small deaths. The protagonist learns to apply "let them" to the perceptions of others. If they want to misunderstand you, let them. If they want to underestimate you, let them. This segment analyzes the concept of mental real estate. Every minute spent trying to manage someone else's opinion of you is a minute stolen from your own creative output and professional growth. The lesson is that your reputation is none of your business, your character is. By detaching from the need for constant validation, the individual develops a Teflon soul where the projections of others no longer have a surface to cling to. The narrative emphasizes that this is not about being cold or indifferent, but about being so anchored in your own mission that the erratic weather of other people's moods no longer dictates your internal climate. The script then moves into the dark forest of the savior complex, where the protagonist feels a compulsive need to fix the lives of everyone around them. They are the ones who call the addict, who pay the bills of the spendthrift, who listen to the same trauma loops for hours. The story depicts this as a form of arrogant empathy, the belief that you know what's best for someone else better than they do. The let them theory here is a radical act of humility. It demands that you let people experience the consequences of their own actions. The analysis highlights that by letting them hit rock bottom or face the fallout, you are finally honoring their journey. You are acknowledging that their soul might need the struggle to find its strength. This part of the narrative is emotionally charged, as it deals with the guilt that comes with stepping back. It teaches that your peace is not a betrayal of their pain. You learn that you can love someone from across a boundary, and that sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is to stop standing in the way of the universe's lessons. This psychological evolution leads to the discovery of the empty space. When the protagonist stops trying to fill every void with control, they find a terrifying but beautiful silence. The narrative describes this space as the womb of transformation. Without the noise of other people's drama, the individual is forced to face their own. The analysis points out that we often use the control of others as a distraction from the work we need to do on ourselves. Let them is the gatekeeper of self-actualization. It forces the question, who am I when I am not busy reacting to everyone else? The story follows the protagonist as they begin to fill this new space with their own hobbies, their own values, and their own quiet joy. The transition from external validation to internal satisfaction is the turning point of the script, leading into the final realization of the theory's true power. The narrative descends further into the psychological architecture of the protective wall, where the protagonist learns that let them is the ultimate filter for authenticity. In this segment of the journey, the story focuses on the agonizing silence that occurs when a seeker stops initiating every conversation and stops being the glue that holds a fading relationship together. We see the character sitting in the quiet of their living room, watching the phone that no longer vibrates with the frantic energy of a one-sided connection. This is the trial of the void. The ego screams that this silence is a failure, a sign that they are unlovable. But the let them theory reframes this as a profound win. If they don't reach out, let them. If the friendship withers without your constant life support, let it. The analysis of this moment reveals that we often spend years haunting our own lives, keeping ghosts of relationships present through sheer force of will. The lesson learned is one of relational efficiency. By letting go of the steering wheel, the protagonist finally sees who is willing to drive toward them. It is a brutal sorting mechanism that clears the clutter of obligation to make room for the warmth of genuine chosen connection. The story illustrates that the let them theory isn't about pushing people away, it's about stopping the act of pulling people who don't want to be pulled. This leads to a powerful realization about the nature of truth. A relationship that requires you to abandon yourself to maintain it is not a relationship, it is a hostage situation. The psychological intensity shifts from the pain of loss to the exhilaration of space. The narrative portrays the protagonist finally breathing deeply, no longer gasping for the thin air of someone else's approval. They begin to understand that let them is not a weapon used against others, but a shield used for the self. It is the realization that you are not the manager of the universe's social calendar. The narrative then pivots to the shadow of the critic, where the protagonist faces the judgment of those who are unsettled by their newfound detachment. When you stop playing the role of the fixer or the people pleaser, the people who benefited from your lack of boundaries will often react with anger or guilt-tripping. The story depicts a tense confrontation, perhaps a holiday dinner or a difficult phone call, where the character is accused of being cold or different. Here, the theory reaches its most defiant stage. Let them be disappointed in you. The narrative commands. Let them be wrong about your intentions. The analysis explores the concept of cognitive sovereignty, the right to own your internal narrative regardless of the external noise. We learn that other people's disappointment is a price worth paying for your own integrity. The lesson is that if you are always busy managing everyone's opinion of you, you are essentially living a life that belongs to them. By letting them have their grievances, the protagonist achieves a state of psychological Teflon, where the projections of others slide off without leaving a mark. This leads into the story of the high-stakes decision, where the character must apply the theory to a professional or creative risk. Imagine the protagonist wanting to quit a stable but soul-crushing job to pursue a path that others deem foolish. The voices of reason are loud, filled with the fear of the collective. The let them theory is applied to the collective anxiety of the herd. Let them think it's a mistake. Let them worry about your future. Let them doubt your sanity. This segment of the narrative analyzes the crab mentality of social groups, where individuals try to pull back anyone who attempts to climb out of the bucket of mediocrity. The lesson learned is that your personal legend, as the alchemists would call it, is a solo journey. By letting them judge your path, you gain the velocity needed to actually walk it. The story shows the protagonist moving forward with a quiet, steely resolve, no longer checking the rearview mirror for the nod of the crowd. As the narrative flows toward its conclusion, it touches upon the self-correction phase. The protagonist realizes that let them also applies to the versions of themselves that they have outgrown. Let that old version of me be misunderstood. Let that past mistake exist without me constantly trying to explain it away. This is the integration of the past self. The analysis highlights that we often stay stuck because we are trying to fix the way we were perceived 5 years ago. Let them grant you the grace of the present moment. The story depicts a scene of profound inner peace, a person standing in a crowded street, feeling the rush of the world around them, yet remaining centered in their own still point. They see people rushing, arguing, judging, and clinging, and they simply offer a silent let them. It is the move from a state of reaction to a state of presence. The narrative emphasizes that this theory is the ultimate antidote to the comparison trap. In a world designed to make us feel inadequate by showing us the highlights of others, let them is the reset button. Let them have their fancy vacations. Let them have their perfect-looking families. Let them have their accolades. This isn't bitterness, it's a radical focus on one's own garden. The analysis suggests that when we let others have their lives, we finally give ourselves permission to have ours. The protagonist is shown investing their energy back into their own health, their own passions, and their own small, daily victories. The psychological weight of the script shifts from the heavy shoulders of the world to the light chords of the individual. The story becomes an anthem of self-possession, a celebration of the person who has finally stopped trying to be the editor of everyone else's manuscript. The final movement of the continuous narrative explores the let them theory as a form of divine surrender. It isn't just a psychological trick, it's a spiritual alignment with the flow of life. The story describes the character watching a storm pass, understanding that just as they cannot stop the rain, they cannot stop the internal storms of those around them. They learn to let the weather be the weather. This analysis concludes that true maturity is the ability to stay connected to people without becoming entangled in their pathology. The lesson is that you can love someone deeply and still say, I will let you be as messy as you choose to be, but I will not join you in the mud. The protagonist is seen standing on solid ground, offering a hand to others but refusing to be dragged into the abyss. This is the archetype of the balanced heart, open but guarded, empathetic but autonomous. The narrative momentum builds toward a sense of total liberation, as the character realizes that the world is much larger, and much more beautiful, Once you stop trying to hold it all together with your bare hands, the narrative reaches its ultimate crescendo in the sanctuary of the self, where the protagonist finally understands that let them is not a passive act of indifference, but an aggressive act of self-preservation. In this final stage, the script follows the character as they navigate a world that is still chaotic, still judgmental, and still demanding. Yet they move through it like a ghost through walls. The psychological intensity shifts from the will to control to the will to be. We see a scene of profound resolution. The protagonist is confronted with a situation that would have previously triggered a weeks-long spiral of anxiety, perhaps a betrayal or a harsh public criticism, and they simply breathe. They don't rehearse a defense. They don't plot a counterattack. They look at the source of the conflict and internally whisper the two words that have become their salvation. By letting them hold their distorted view, the protagonist realizes they have reclaimed 100% of their own power. This final segment analyzes the concept of radical acceptance. Most people fail to find peace because they are waiting for the world to apologize, to understand, or to change before they allow themselves to be happy. The let them theory flips the script, asserting that your happiness is a sovereign state that requires no external permission. The narrative illustrates that when you let them act out their shadows, you are no longer a character in their play, you are the audience, and you are free to leave the theater whenever you choose. The lesson is that your emotional state is the only thing in this universe you actually own. To give it away to someone who doesn't even value their own peace is the ultimate form of self-betrayal. The protagonist is shown standing on a metaphorical cliffside, watching the waves of other people's dramas crash far below. Remaining untouched by the spray, the story concludes with the archetype of the released soul. The character looks back at the person they used to be, the one who was constantly fixing, explaining, and pleading with a sense of mourning and then profound gratitude. They realize that the greatest lie they ever believed was that their care could change the will of another. By releasing that lie, they have finally found the energy to change themselves. The analysis reinforces that let them is the highest form of respect you can show to another person. It is the acknowledgement of their right to their own journey, their own mistakes, and their own growth, even if the growth happens away from you. This is the emotional freedom the book intends to convey, the end of the war with reality. You stop trying to make the river flow uphill and start learning how to swim with the current. The core message of the let them theory is that your mental health is directly proportional to your ability to distinguish between what is your business and what is none of your business. Most of our suffering is self-inflicted through the arrogant assumption that we should have a say in how others live their lives. By abdicating the throne of the universal manager, you finally gain the crown of your own life. It is a journey from the exhaustion of manipulation to the peace of presence. The book teaches that you cannot control the wind, but you can let it blow past you without letting it knock you down. You are finally free because you have stopped trying to hold the world together and started allowing it to simply exist, exactly as it is. While you exist, exactly as you are, the narrative ends with the protagonist walking into a future that is no longer defined by the expectations of the herd. They are light. They are unburdened. They are finally, for the first time, their own person. The silence is no longer empty, it is full of the resonance of their own truth. They understand that the highest form of power is not the ability to change others, but the ability to remain unchanged by them. Control is the illusion that keeps you a prisoner, let them is the truth that sets you free.